But now, quick, I have just got my notes, I can't remember all this, sorry. So we're now going to hear from Guy Oliver, who is the Enterprise Sales Director and Head of Insight at Muso. Guy's lecture title is How are Major Studios, Broadcasters and Distributors Using Piracy Data to Drive Revenue? Quick bio from Guy. So Sales Director and Head of Insight at Muso, a data company that provides the most complete view of global piracy and unlicensed media consumption. He works with studios, broadcasters, video-on-demand platforms and distributors to better understand the film and TV content landscape and their audiences. The floor is yours.
I wouldn't be able to remember all that either. Thanks for having me here. I'm here to talk about the importance of understanding your audience and the relevance to you as broadband professionals. My topic is probably slightly different to what you're used to here. I predominantly work with people in acquisitions or strategy or insight. But of course, the one thing that is common, everyone who's using our data is doing it via broadband. And also you're the audience as well. We all watch TV and film. We're probably all interested in music or publishing or software. And these are the things that we track. So, one of the key words in entertainment, content is king. It's the most important thing when you're trying to engage your customers or your audience, whatever that content might be in any category. So, as mentioned earlier, I'm Guy, I work at Muso. We have two sides to our business. We operate anti-piracy, which I don't really work on. And then we also have the world's biggest data platform tracking what people are watching on the global piracy network. So we can see what people are watching at a title level. We've got 702,000 titles that we're tracking. It makes us the biggest audience data repository in the world. It's a vulgar way of putting it, but we like to call the piracy network the world's biggest video-on-demand platform. Going back to what Sarah said earlier, she was talking about engaging individuals on a personal level and better understanding people, adapting and being curious and listening. And we do that on the macro level. And we try and understand what do you, the audience of these entertainment vectors, want to watch, want to consume, want to use, want to read. It's a core thing with market research or insight is, understanding that those behaviors and smashing that vase based on your current preconceptions. And, I was speaking to Jason earlier, and it's one of the things that everyone can relate to. We do what we've always done because it's worked in the past, and even if it hasn't worked in the past, we continue to do it. But insight and audience research is about constantly adapting and changing your understanding of what you're doing, and that applies to everybody. So at the end of the lecture, when I finished, I'd love you all to think more about what your company could be doing with data and understanding your customers, to feel enthused about how that data can be used and also how demand for content affects all of us as an audience or a provider or a business. Of course, I want you to all be very excited and talk to each other about how wonderful my lecture was, and potentially tell other people in your organization who this may be more relevant to directly. So I guess my first question would be, could you put your hands up nice and high, don't worry, I'm not the police, if you've ever pirated anything, whether that be a sporting event, a TV show, a film, a book, anything at all?
Include CDs.
Betamax. Good. I thought we were going to have a lot of Bill Clintons who said, I tried smoking it, but I didn't inhale. We know that around about 73% of the British population has pirated at some point. It's a huge market, but it's very easy to think about piracy in a negative manner. This is stealing. People are stealing people's content. There's companies losing revenue. But we like to think about it in terms of what do people want to watch? What do people want to consume? How do we understand these customers? So any ideas what this number is? I'll give you a clue. It's not how much Jeff Bezos made since I started talking. Okay, so that is the number of visits that we tracked to piracy sites last year globally. Now, obviously a huge number to sink in. It's not the amount of individuals, of course, because there's not that many people on the planet, but it's a vast number. But that's all we're able to track. And of course, we don't know what we don't know. But we are the only company in the world that, as a sole focus, studies piracy. So we like to think we have the biggest database of known locations on the planet. There are also 3.4 billion people with internet access in the world. Now, as an example, Netflix, I say only, they only have 200 million subscribers, I think 20 million less than a year ago. But, you know, that is a tiny fraction. There's 570 million people in North America. So the audience that we're dealing with is vast. And you know, why is the data so valuable, which is the really important question? And why do we use it, and how do companies use that to increase revenue? So, you know, the most important thing to think about is, you know, what would people watch if they had access to every TV show, every film that was ever made? And the same applies to books or sports or software. Also, in research, we try and remove bias. Now, the challenge is, traditionally for TV, we have Nielsen in America, set-top boxes that monitor what you're watching. We have Barb in the UK, the British Audience Ratings Board. But that only tracks a sample, a small sample of the population who have been paid to have that box in their house tracking what they watch. And there's also cost availability as well. You know, how much does this cost? Are you likely to be that kind of person to want to be involved in a study? With piracy data, everything is free to everyone. It's available on the same day around the planet to everyone equally. And also there aren't the biases involved with when you're on Netflix and it suggests what to watch next. There's only a certain number of titles available on those platforms. The same with linear TV channels or you know, home broadband. You know, you have a limited availability because of the rights that these companies have bought to show this content. So, you know, no data set is devoid of bias, but of course, you know, there are a lot of biases removed in this data set. So the other question is this data relevant? Do they represent an audience? Do they represent who is going to be watching it on my platform, whether I'm a regional broadcaster or if I have a VOD platform, video on demand? So we have studied this extensively, but there are many other companies in the research industry and other broadcasters who have as well. We know that piracy goes hand in hand with sales. So for example, with box office data, if something does really well, like a Marvel movie, it gets a lot of piracy, no surprises there. If it's a big football match, it will be also pirated a lot. If it was the film Cats, maybe not so much. So it's a direct proxy for legitimate consumption. We know that if we look at the piracy data, we can have data on titles that weren't released in the cinemas. We can use those as comparison title groups to better predict the future of how a similar title is likely to perform, even if those films that are similar were not released in that particular territory. And the same goes for home entertainment. We've done the same with Disney, Amazon, Netflix, and corroborated that our data very closely matches theirs on home entertainment. And you can also do this via Netflix Minutes Watch, which they publish at a country level every week. The other interesting thing, people always think that people who pirate content are very different. You have a paying customer versus someone who steals. But that couldn't be further from the truth. In many research studies over the last 15 years that I've been involved in working in audience research, they all demonstrate that pirates are demographically very, very similar or indistinguishable to the legitimate audience. So same age, gender, income, education level. And the University of Amsterdam's meta-study found that, again, demographically, pirates resemble legal consumers very closely. But more importantly, their legal consumption is twice that of people who've never ever pirated. So we know their main difference is that they're hyper-engaged. They spend more money on entertainment. Other studies I've been involved in have seen that your average pirate has 5.3 online entertainment subscriptions, whether that be Netflix or Spotify or Bandcamp, compared to someone who's never pirated, who has 2.1 subscriptions. They're 2.5 times more likely to go to the cinema or the theatre or a live music event as well than someone who's never pirated. And this is a very, very messy looking graph, but we can see that the gender by country of consumers, they do skew slightly more in our data towards male for each country. But this is an overall view of total site visits. And also the age demographic splits that we see in our own data tend to very closely resemble by country those of our customers in studios or VOD platforms or broadcasters. So the audience is broadly the same, but they spend more, and the sample size is much bigger than what you would traditionally work with. So I want to show you some interesting studies that I've worked on or projects that I've done with clients that focus on titles themselves. We're all consumers. We probably all watch a lot of TV and film, and that's what this particular study is about. We do work in sports. Obviously, if you're a sponsor of a sporting event, you don't care how many people paid to see it. You care how many people saw your logo. So we can help them better understand the scale of that audience and the value of the sponsorship. But I'm going to focus on TV and film today. So the first one was an interesting anecdotal experience that I had. So when I was at university 20 years ago, I lived in a house full of Koreans. And my friend Kev's mum used to come over from Korea and bring over all the latest DVDs of Korean films, and I got very into Korean cinema. Fast forward to 3 or 4 years ago, Kev sent me a trailer for Parasite, the film that won the Oscar, and it was stunning. Every frame in there I would have put on my wall. But I was tracking that on the Global Piracy Network, and it came out in Korea, and then won a film festival, won another in China, and then it started popping up in different countries around the world. France and Germany tend to be engaged more with international content, but it carried on popping up everywhere. Then it was nominated for the Oscar. It blew up. Then it won the Oscar, and it was enormous. The amount of demand globally was huge. 13 months later, I went to one of my clients' cinemas, Curzon, in central London, that had the film on. And I went with 12 of my friends who work in TV and film and the theatre, all of them interested in the arts. And I was the only one that hadn't already watched it, many of them multiple times. So that told me two things. One, my friends have no respect for my career and what I do for a living. And two, that, there was no one there who hadn't seen it. These were all pirates, and they were paying to see it. So that corroborates the data, and I hate anecdotal data because I'm a researcher, but it's a very good example. And I'm not going to try and purposefully focus on Korean content today or Asian content, but I like to let the data talk for itself. So unfortunately, I'm going to. So acquisition of content. I help companies understand which titles they should be buying. And again, we're all set in our ways. And as a researcher and a parent of 2 daughters, I realize I'm constantly in the wrong all the time, and my preconceived notions are usually incorrect. So people, when they're buying content, They have their set ways of doing things, and they think that their audience wants to watch X, Y, or Z, but maybe they don't keep up with the time. Jason and I were talking about children being involved with TikTok and how different that is to us growing up and how engaged children are with much more diverse content types. So this was December 2020, and, you know, I mean, hands up who's heard of The Mandalorian? Okay. Hands up who's heard of True Beauty? Okay, not one person in this room. And I had, through sheer chance, because I work with Webtoon, and they are a Korean webcomics company. They're the biggest distributor of Korean webcomics in the world. And in Korea, what they often do is they will have a comic book online. If that does really well, they'll develop it into an anime, a cartoon. If that does well, then they will consider developing that into a live-action TV series because it already has a grassroots audience. So that's how True Beauty came about. It's a high school romance thing, maybe more akin to Mean Girls if you're familiar with a more American version. Now, I was looking at the data for clients, and this is more broad to help my range of clients understand if there are any titles they should be looking for. But the top 10 is always a good place to start. Usually a bit more boring because it says what you would expect to see. The Mandalorian Season 2 had just come out. Obviously, that's going to be huge. Season 1, people were obviously catching up on that and rewatching it. The other titles in there are what you would expect to see, but True Beauty was in at number 9, above The Queen's Gambit. Now, this is a title that only had a release in Korea and China at the time. It had not had a release anywhere else, no marketing anywhere else in the world. And a bias that does exist in our data set is if marketing is occurring around content, then people are more likely to watch it. But fast forward to January, True Beauty was the most watched TV show in the world. This is above WandaVision, which was Disney Plus's kind of one of their flagship, or if not their flagship title in that year. Admittedly, it launched mid-month, but this is a title, True Beauty, that had not been marketed anywhere on the planet, apart from Korea and China, and the following month, India. So this aided one of my clients to acquire the rights to this. They put it behind a Korean content paywall, which I think was a bad idea because it could have been their Squid Game, but they still did very well out of it. But this again shows us that demand isn't necessarily what you would think. And it's breaking those preconceived ideas of what do people actually want to watch. And the same if we look over the last year of data, and I'm keeping this very top level, but what have people watched around the world in the year? Well, most people have heard of The Last of Us, House of the Dragon, Lord of the Rings of Power, the most expensive TV show ever produced. But Chainsaw Man, My Hero Academia, The Eminence in Shadows, and Blue Lock, these are all animated cartoons. They're animes. Chainsaw Man, I'm sure you're all familiar with. It's a boy who is possessed by a demon, and when he gets angry, his arms turn into chainsaws. We've all watched it, I know. But it was the third most popular title on the planet. 72 million views. And what we're tracking is people who have streamed this film for more than 5 minutes, or TV show, and anyone who has completely downloaded a file of an episode or the entire series. So this completely turns on its head what you think the audience is wanting to watch, because some of the clients that we work with, big studios, I've said to them, have you ever considered anime, for example? And they said, well, we have shown an interest in niche content. I've said to them, okay, well, that year, Andor, Star Wars, came out. So these titles are less niche than Star Wars. And that is a complete paradigm shift into what we think people are interested in seeing. In terms of how this data is applied, we can look back at things like this and say, well, where did we go wrong? where did this happen? With some of the theatrical companies we work with, for example, they want to understand, how did we lose money? Where did we go so wrong? One of my clients, they brought out a film that had won Palme d'Or in Cannes, and it had been enormously successful with reviewers. But they made a huge loss on it. And it was a hip-hop film set in Morocco about young ladies learning to rap. And it's a great film, I've seen it. But it just did not do well in the UK. So we were able to build a comp title list, which is what you traditionally do for film and TV. You build a comparison group of titles, and you look at how they've performed based on traditional data metrics. The traditional one for cinema being what used to be called Rentrack and is called ComScore now, but box office data at a individual theatre level. And you create a list of similar titles and say, you know, based on these performances here, how is this new title that's similar likely to perform? But of course, what happens if it rained the entire month that that film was out? What happens if that film came out at the same time as Avatar, as opposed to Cats? Sorry, I need to stop using Cats as an example. You're going to get a very different metric. What if the titles that are similar are from a long time ago? Some of these titles, like The Commitments that are used by companies in these comp title lists, you know, they're from 1970s. So, you know, some of that audience, a large portion of that audience might be dead now. You know, how does that become relevant to current data? So we built a list of titles that were French language, the biggest French language films around about the time of the acquisition. We could put in 50, 60 films from that period. And then the same for hip-hop themed content, which were the main themes in these films or the driving factors for people to see it. And the data that we saw, because again it's a good proxy for legitimate consumption, showed that the UK under-indexed on those two main themes by 80%. And what we do is we look at the amount of demand on that title, like these numbers that you're seeing. We compare that to the average demand in the UK, and then we do the same at a global level. And that can give us a nice baseline of how each country is performing for this type of content. And it was the exact amount of sort of revenue that they had budgeted and lost around that title. And we see this quite commonly. So it's a really good way of understanding where we went wrong in the past or where we can change things in the future. So Love Island, another title I'm sure you're all very, very familiar with. So again, you know, you might think with a title like Love Island, it's available on ITV. It's available on ITVX for catch-up. We're in the UK. Surely people must not pirate the Love Island. Right? Why would you? You can get it so easily. But, you know, it was the 7th most pirated title in the month that it came out in the United Kingdom. Rather interestingly, there were other titles in there that you wouldn't expect to see as well. Curious Osman is a Turkish TV series, and that was 4th on the list. But this idea again that piracy is a different audience, it shows that it really isn't. These are the big shows that are out in this time period. These are the ones that people want to watch, and that is important. Obviously, the team at ITV probably aren't too happy about that because people are watching it through the piracy network rather than theirs, and this is a legitimate concern for them. But it helps us baseline and understand what happens here. Now, the amount of data going through broadband for this is vast. We have the biggest database in the world of known piracy locations, as far as we're aware. we track around about 570,000 piracy sites and locations at any one time. These could be in the form of streaming sites that are like Netflix or Amazon or Disney. They could be cyber lockers, which is a term we use to define things like Google Drive or Mega Upload, where you can house a file. Stream rippers for music, where you can pull that down. So there are many delivery methods, but some of these sites, they're getting exponentially more traffic than the New York Times or the BBC. The amount of traffic to these sites are vast, and of course the people who are distributing this content are criminals. We do see a lot of organized crime involved in this, but it's a complex issue because the amount of money involved is high. They make their money through marketing. There is a certain amount of inertia within certain industries because they are profiting from it as well. So it's a very complex issue. And we do very much perceive the distribution side of the people doing this as criminal. But the audience who's consuming it, they're customers. They are people like you and I. As we saw earlier, a lot of people put their hands up. Hopefully that wasn't caught on camera. But it's the audience. And this is really important because we need to understand audience. As Sarah said, you have to adapt. You have to be curious. You have to listen. You have to challenge current paradigms in order to better understand how to operate your business more efficiently, how to drive more revenue, how to engage with your customers. And, I'm a huge data nerd. I love TV and film. I love the arts. I'm very engaged in music, in TV and film. And it's a perfect place for me to work because I get to do both. But again, it's very easy for me to lose sight of why I'm doing it for work rather than for fun, and go down these rabbit holes like you do on YouTube when you're looking for stuff and forget that there's meant to be an ultimate aim. But the ultimate aim is to understand that audience and deliver a more enjoyable experience for them, which is good for all of us. And of course, oh yeah, please, jump in. Sorry, microphone, I forgot. We have to...
Really interesting subject. You've got a figure there, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Season 1, 2022, piracy demand, 650,753. What is that in percentage terms against the legal download? Is it a drop in the ocean, or is it a really big dent against the real paid-for download? It's a bit like a ship. You've got to keep so much water out before it sinks, but you accept the fact the ship's going to leak a little bit. Is this a small amount of leakage, or is this a really big percentage against what people are paying for?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. He's not a plant, by the way. It's a really interesting question, and it differs greatly depending on many factors. So this is a whole area unto itself. I'm going to sidestep onto sports. So as an example, I did a study about AS Roma in Italy, and we looked at all of the piracy for that team. Now, 20% of their legitimate audience was pirated. It was higher in Italy than the average of other countries, but 20% of their total audience, and that's what we could track. There are sites maybe that we're missing. We only know what we know, as I mentioned earlier. But with the Anthony Joshua versus Ruiz fight, it was 180% of the audience. So the amount of people paying to watch it, it was that plus 80% again on the piracy network. So it differs greatly. And the same goes for content on video-on-demand platforms. One of the greatest challenges in audience research, and actually this is how I kind of came to be at Muso. I was doing audience research using legitimate methods in a previous company, and I felt like the methods that we were using were not fit for standard because there's so much we can't see. There's so many biases that are introduced. Prior to video-on-demand platforms, you had DVD sales or VHS sales, and that gave us very, very good data on home entertainment. But when the video-on-demand platforms came about, you couldn't get anything because they don't share that data, they don't sell it. And the reason why is because they have so much market dominance that if they only understand what people want to watch and other people don't, they can maintain that market dominance. So as an audience researcher, even now, and I work with many of these companies, I don't get any of their data. They won't share it with me. They might give me feedback about whether it matches theirs or not. We usually do extensive pilots so they can test to see if our hypothesis matches their data, which it does. But I don't get to see anything. Nobody does. So we don't know. But sometimes there are official figures that are published. So it's easier with box office, for example. We know how many people went to see a movie in the cinema. And sometimes with films it could be anywhere from 2% to 20%. A really good example with theatrical, just gone, Avatar, Wakanda Forever, and Black Adam came out in December. Now, we know that your average cinema goer will only go to the cinema once or twice a month, even if they're a hyper-engaged consumer. So they're going to choose which film they watch. Well, we know from the box office data, everybody chose to watch Avatar. It's a big screen film like Maverick, but it's also got the 3D element, so it's the one you're going to watch in the cinema. Then the next two are two big superhero movies. Well, if you're going to choose a superhero movie, Black Adam got terrible reviews, Wakanda Forever got great reviews, and also the lead actor had died, and it featured a funeral scene that a lot of people were very emotionally engaged with. So, although I've mentioned that our data is a really good proxy for legitimate consumption, it's often the areas where it isn't that it tells us the most. So, in that scenario, Black Adam had 2.5 times the amount of piracy that Wakanda Forever and Avatar had combined. And that says to me, and of course I'm jumping to a conclusion here, but I think it's a fair assumption to make, that people chose to go and see Avatar and Wakanda Forever and thought, I'll just pirate Black Adam. And probably, judging from the box office figures, they didn't choose to go and watch it afterwards either. So again, the title itself, does it have rewatch value? A film like Black Adam, perhaps you'll just watch it once. It's a popcorn big action movie. Whereas Parasite, in my very anecdotal case, people wanted to see that multiple times. So again, it depends on the content as well. So the dent of piracy on income is a very difficult one to predict, and one that the anti-piracy side of our business is constantly trying to model. But there are so many factors that affect that.
Okay, so you've shown some really interesting data. I can understand all the traffic data you can collect. The demographic data, I'm intrigued by as to the methodologies you've used there.
Yes.
It's not exactly something people are going to admit to unless we're us idiots.
Yeah, I mean, that is our greatest challenge. So with traditional audience research, as I mentioned, you have Nielsen and Barb, Nielsen in the US, Barb in the UK. They're the gold standard of audience research data. They have a set-top box in your house that tracks everything you watch, and you have to give your own demographic details. Interestingly, John might be able to help me out with some data in the US, which I'm really interested to talk about, because we're constantly trying to get closer to that truth. But even with those, the demographic is a household demographic. Now, I've got children. I was a child. My demographic is very different to my parents, both obviously in terms of age or gender, but also education level, income, that kind of thing. So trying to understand audiences at a household level, even with that data set, which is the gold standard, is hard. For us, it's very difficult to track demographics, particularly with issues like GDPR. But we are able to look at inferred demographics that are over a broad audience size through our own data. Although inferred demographic means we haven't directly asked them that question of age, gender, income, education level, whether they're a parent or not. that kind of thing. However, the University of Amsterdam that I quoted earlier on, that study was a meta-study of 35,000 people, nationally representative to 12 countries, equally distributed by continent. And they were age, gender, and I think income level were the three demographics that they were predominantly tracking. So they will have a nationally representative split in each of those panels, and they will get people to answer those questions. Again, the challenge is in separate studies that I've seen, people who are prolific pirates, who pirate a lot of content and are voracious consumers, are more likely to overstate how much they pirate. Whereas people who only pirate occasionally are less likely to admit it. So again, there's a bias there in the audience behavior of what people are going to tell us. So there are many challenges to fully understanding who this audience is, how they behave. But there is a wealth of data that's available. I think the first time I encountered this that really got me thinking was that I used to work at the Market Research Society regulating the industry. We ran a lot of events similar to this one, and a researcher who had done a project on this kind of content had the genius idea of looking at the piracy network to try and identify acquisitions. And they found that Prison Break, which was failing on I think it was HBO maybe at the time, was huge on the piracy network. So another provider picked it up when it had been cancelled and carried it on, promoted it better, and the show was a runaway success that had multiple extra seasons. And although the data that they used was very rudimentary and not a great collection methodology because they didn't have the data at the time, it did lead to a large amount of profit. And that gave me, sort of planted the seed, I guess, for me ending up at Muso. But demographics are very hard to get. They're the biggest challenge that we have for many reasons. But if we did have accurately recorded individual demographics on all of our users, I wouldn't be here because I would be on my yacht in the Maldives. I don't have a yacht, by the way.
Just looking at your Love Island and also the demographic, do you guys monitor social media? Because I'm guessing something spiked maybe on social media that then makes the ripple effect that, okay, I now need to go and watch that. So do you guys watch social media at all?
Really interesting one, that, because no, we don't, but there are amazing companies that have social media monitoring tools and specifically do that in the way that we focus on this. And a friend of mine, Anjali, who used to be the head of marketing at Twitter, started her own social media monitoring company. We've extensively tested her data against ours, and it's really interesting to see where these spikes happen, because like the TikTok conversation, we work with many record labels on piracy protection, and I jump into those conversations from time to time because it has data that interests me. But we'll see, for example, maybe Pulp the band will be, releasing a new album, big spike, no surprise. We remove a lot of piracy, there's nothing. But then maybe 12 months later, we see a massive spike again, and there's no release, no marketing, nothing to drive that. We bring it to the attention of the customer, the record label, and then they investigate social media and find out somebody has started a TikTok trend dancing to one of these tracks, and it's massively re-engaged. We also see this with Fortnite, the computer game, with music. So in Fortnite, for those of you who haven't played it, you run around, shoot each other, and you can build buildings. And it's massive. I think it was a few years ago the most successful game in the world financially, and it was like an economy of a medium-sized country. Enormously popular. But when you kill someone, you can also do dance moves, and those dance moves might be Peter Crouch doing his robot, or the clown from Stephen King's It doing his scary dance. And you can buy these dance moves and do them. And we've seen a reverse effect of people going back and watching the Peter Crouch game where he did the robot dance, or a massive spike in the new version of Stephen King's It where the dance happened, and then a subsequent spike in the original Stephen King's It. So it's all related. And the problem is this is a rabbit hole that you can go down with how these trends are influencing each other.
Wasn't it Kate Bush's song that became famous again when Stranger Things came out? Wasn't it?
Exactly, yes.
That one.
And we work with that record label, and we've seen a huge spike, and then subsequent spikes in artists like Belinda Carlisle as well. So it's all related, and this is often the problem. It can become very complex to try and understand these consumer trends, and we don't have all the answers, but we have a piece of that puzzle.
Two kind of interlinked questions. If there was an index for the ease of piracy, is it becoming easier or harder as technologies change?
Good question, and one we haven't really addressed as much as I would like to. I mean, I think it's become easier. There are various trends that we see. Publishing piracy has massively increased year on year, largely driven by the sheer huge demand for manga content or manhwa in Korea, so comic books. But they are enormously popular with young people. You know, my 10-year-old daughter went to World Book Day dressed as Nezuko from Demon Slayer, a Japanese anime thing, and all of her friends were going in. It wasn't Harry Potter this time, and it's amazing to see that trend shift. And you know, that's a huge trend change. The music industry, piracy has dropped since Spotify, year on year. The last 2 years, we've seen a steady increase for the first time in 15 years. And we see that as around subscription fatigue. There are so many platforms now. People are getting tired because content is spread out everywhere. But also ownership. People are buying more vinyl records now. That's on the increase. And as a result, we've seen people wanting to own their music rather than rent it from Spotify. You can also get higher definition copies. I was speaking to the CEO of a big hip-hop label in America that had its sort of heyday in the 80s. And she said, you can get better content on the Piracy Network than we can provide. You can download a file with our golden years of hip-hop from our record label. We don't own the rights to some of it anymore. And you can also get bootleg videos from concerts in back streets in New York that these groups did as part of this package. So, you know, also with films, you can download an 8K version on the torrent network with full Dolby surround sound if you're a very enthusiastic cinema viewer. So there are so many factors there to address with that question. But again, there are as many drivers as there are personality types. Yeah. Well, I guess I should have moved it over to the questions a little bit earlier. There we go.
Yeah, all of this is based on data that you've acquired over the internet.
Yes.
And if I were
Thank you for bringing the broadband link in there.
But if I were running a piracy site, I wouldn't really want people like you to see what's going on unless I could find a way of flogging it to you. So how do you extract this data?
Yes, so the interesting thing about piracy is these sites, they want to be found because that's how they make their money. The higher traffic, the better. So anything that they do to try and restrict us from finding it also restricts their audience. Now, on the anti-piracy side, predominantly what companies do, and I won't bore you with this because it bores me a bit as well, but we do what's called notice and takedown. So a notice is a Digital Millennial Copyright Act notice that gets sent to a website saying you've infringed on our client's content or our content, take it down within X amount of time, or we'll take follow-up steps. So we have compliant sites and non-compliant sites. A compliant site is one that says, you know what, I want to walk that tightrope between legal and illegal. So I'll take it down because they're big enough to cause us a problem. And then if any government or IPO comes after us, then we can put our hands in the air and say, look, I have a full record of all of the compliance that we've had with DMCA notices. We can't be held accountable for what people put on our website. And as a result, they don't get site blocked at an ISP level within that country. So they get more traffic. On the flip side, we have non-compliant sites. You've probably heard of Pirate Bay in the news, where the owners of Pirate Bay got put in jail. They tried to extradite them to America. That only served to increase the traffic to that location. But they're blocked at an ISP level. If you try and access their website in the UK or one of their proxy sites, you get a message that says you can't see this. But of course, you can use a VPN to view that website. So I say, of course, you might not know, but yes, you can. So with those, they are also making a business decision of, well, I'm going to lose some traffic by people who don't use VPNs, but I'm going to have a much bigger catalogue of content and probably the really important content people want to watch. So will that counterbalance the loss that I make in terms of non-VPN traffic? So they all make business decisions based on this. But ultimately, they don't want to stop people from seeing their content. It would only be in a decision like that.
Okay. I was thinking a bit more of how you can see what's available on a pirate site, but you can't. Can you see how many times each title is downloaded?
So what we can see, so much in the same way as Nielsen or Barb can't track whether you've actually watched something on the TV or not. It's been played on the TV, but a lot of people multi-screen now. Some people cook while they're having noise on in the background. My colleague Larry, and I don't know how he does it because I have to watch something start to finish. He puts on a TV series, watches the first 5 minutes, and then the whole TV series is completed while he falls asleep. So that audience data there is the antithesis of what mine would say, but it would still say the same thing. What we can track is if somebody has streamed this TV show or film for more than 5 minutes. A normal metric for engagement is 3 minutes to call that a view. We say 5 because with piracy you get pop-ups that you might have to close. You might want to wait and see if the quality of the content is good enough, if it's a hand cam or if it's grainy or bad sound. So we came to that metric with many of our bigger studio clients as a reasonable metric for engagement. For torrent, it's much easier. So for those who don't know, torrenting is file sharing. You find a website that has what's called magnet links. You take that link, you put it in a piece of software, and then that connects to a cloud of users, and it points you towards who to download that file from. And that file may be downloaded from multiple people because they might turn off their computer and it finds a new person that has that file, and it keeps downloading it. What we monitor is a completed download. So when someone has finished downloading that entire file onto their computer. We don't know if they've watched it. They may be a doomsday prepper who's trying to fill up their multimedia bunker. Or they might, watch absolutely everything that they've downloaded. But that's what we're monitoring. The beautiful thing about this is it's all publicly available data. So it's fully GDPR compliant. But the only thing that makes us different, our special sauce, if you will, is that we're one of the oldest anti-piracy companies in the world. We know where to look. So we're able to say, these are the sites. We've already catalogued them by the type of piracy they are, the type of content that they have, their delivery methods. And we match it against a database called TMDB, which is similar to IMDb. And we can match those titles using automation to those codes within TMDB. So it's publicly available data, but we're the only people who've been bothered to actually to build this system. So hope that answers the question in a roundabout way.
I know you're a bit young, but a
Thank
lot
you.
younger than me. But do you
made
know
my
who
day.
did? We just discussed earlier. Do you know who did the first piracy in music in England in the 70s? Do you know the person?
No, I don't know.
His name is Richard Branson.
Oh, really?
Yes, he used to bring not CDs, records, LPs, and 45 from France, and he used to sell them in Soho. I was there, and I can see him every day. Do you know who bought the record? no the rich directors are, us, which are quite poor at that time, because it was a third of the price of the UK records.
Yeah.
And that's what he did when he started his business. And he only stopped when they got him at customs 1 year. He got caught and he stopped doing it and he started doing other things in music. So
Oh, that's fascinating.
That is the story.
I'm going to use that one.
What happened, that's what happened in the 70s.
Amazing.
And later on I worked in cable in the late 80s. What happened is, we used to be in Birmingham. The people used to steal the films we used to have broadcasting. It was the poor areas of King's Heath, not in Solihull.
Yeah.
So in Solihull, with the rich people, they used to carry on and subscribe to the films. But in Small Heath, where poor people, they used to buy a little box which descrambled the signals.
Yeah.
So they used to subscribe in the beginning, watching, and then we used to have a Gerald system, which was on the box. And then suddenly they all disappear. We found out that somebody, an Indian guy, who was selling them all these little boxes, put them online and descrambled them. And we found out from the salespeople, because when they disconnect, they lost some of the percentage. But they used to go through the window and say, oh my God, they're watching the film. So that's been on for years, and it happened in the society. If you're a rich person, you wouldn't do that. So it happens on the level which is, no, I like that because my friend is watching that in the school, and he tells me, but I can't afford it. So he's going to do the kind of piracy.
Well,
and that's what happened.
That's a really, really good point, that pricing is often a big driver of piracy. Many of our analysts on my data team are in Cluj in Romania, that has a wealth of tech expertise there as well. And for example, a game on a PlayStation 5 there is the same monetary cost as it is in the UK, but salaries are a quarter of the salary. So pricing obviously drives piracy, whether you can afford it or not. But I've already said I don't like anecdotal evidence, but I'm going to give another one. I was at my friend's twins' birthday party 7-8 years ago. There were 3, I think. One of my friends owns a very large research agency. We've worked together for years. He's the CEO, and he's very wealthy. He has a box at Chelsea Football Club where he invites me along. I'm not really into football. I like rock climbing, but it's fun to go, and they have nice food. My other friend, Paul, worked at Smithfield Meat Market and was subsequently bankrupt 6 months later because he just was not earning enough and had financial difficulties. But both of them, John had a box at Chelsea, Paul had a season ticket to Arsenal. They spent large amounts of money comparatively for each of them on football, but at the birthday party, both of them were pirating that game on their phone. So the driver for them was not financial. They felt it was their God-given right to watch this content because they've already paid for it. So for them, they didn't see the problem with it. And they were at different ends of the socioeconomic spectrum. Also, you know, I played trumpet as a child growing up, and I studied at the Guildhall School of Music, and a way of making money at Christmas time was to go and play carols with friends and do a little quartet thing and go around houses. And we very quickly learned that if we went to the wealthy areas, they would give us like Werther's Originals and stuff. If we went to the poor areas, they'd give us £5 notes. So your proclivity to spend money isn't necessarily linked to how much money you have.
Maybe become a fashion now because your friend is stealing and said, oh, I can do that as well. Maybe it's much easier than it used to be.
Well, yes. I mean, there are so many drivers. With torrenting, it used to be predominantly a young male tech-savvy demographic. But now that it's so much easier and these streaming sites are so accessible and they have the same user experience as Netflix, for example, it's very easy to go, I'll do my due diligence, see if I can find this film easily. If I can't, I've spent 10 minutes doing it. You know what, I'll just pay. So there are so many drivers to why you pirate, and many of those aren't necessarily financial. Yeah.
As society crumbles in this country, is piracy...
Smash the vase.
Yeah, is piracy keeping in line with the general trends of what's happening in this country? I.e., you know, people will loot now instead of buying a TV or whatever, right? We're told on the news every night it's getting worse. We're just told that, right? Is piracy keeping roughly in line with what's happening in general society, or is it something that's more under control?
Oh, I've used piracy as a proxy for legitimate consumption, but never for looting or street violence. So I'm not really sure. I mean, I think the big trend, of course, is certainly in entertainment is subscription fatigue. As people find it more and more difficult to get the things that they want, they are more likely to steal. So price increases in supermarkets, cost of living, are more likely to make you maybe on the self-checkout accidentally chuck something into your basket. And of course, as the cost of living crisis goes up, that probably will move up higher through the wealthier demographics as well. So I imagine there are many parallels there.
I worked with Sky early on with conditional access, and it was this case of it's a cost of protection versus how much gets stolen, how much you have to spend to protect your content versus how much it costs if you lose it.
Yes.
It's not so much in the sort of the internet protection, digital marketing kind of watermarking kind of thing. So I mean, there is a natural tendency that the technology is getting easier to pirate, but it's this thing about what's our social status. Is it something that's linked to what we're doing as a society?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting subject area, and of course a lot of that will be driven by price, but many of it won't be. I mean, for TV and film, people are getting fed up with when Disney launched, they pulled all of their titles and all of the companies that they've bought. You know, the film Alien, you know, the alien is now a Disney princess. She's actually the queen, so she's owned by Disney now. And all of that content was pulled from all the other VOD platforms so that Disney could launch their own and have those unique IPs on there. And we're seeing that more and more. You know, Paramount Plus are doing incredibly well at the moment. They're one of the studios that are really blowing up in Hollywood, and in a good way, financially. So, you know, we're seeing this huge diversification of where you have to get content, and people are getting fed up. I have a Samsung TV. There's a search bar on it, and it's great because it tells me which platform the content I'm looking for is on, so I don't have to go from one to the other and try and find it, which removes one of those blockers. But there are so many. I mean, I have about 7 online entertainment subscriptions, and I regularly find content that I want to see that is on one that I don't subscribe to. Well, where do I stop? And that drives, and that's not necessarily a cost thing. That's a user experience thing. It's a frustration thing.
Well, that flipped on its head, didn't it? Because you buy one subscription that have all your TV channels in it, and then they say, oh, no, we want micro subscriptions. We want to have a sports subscription, a movie subscription, a real TV subscription. And then all of a sudden people realize, hang on a minute, they're charging me more now to combine all of those than I was by having one complete subscription that entertains
Precisely.
the whole thing in.
Yes. So, you know, it's... sorry, I'm overrunning, aren't I? My wife warned me about this.
No, thank you very much.
Well, absolute pleasure, everyone. Thank you.